Richard Calloway stood at his window, a cup of black coffee in his hand, as the sun peeked over the horizon of the quiet cul-de-sac in Oak Ridge Heights. The neighborhood, with its pristine lawns, white picket fences, and uniform two-story homes, epitomized suburban comfort and security. Retired from his long career as a corporate risk assessor, Richard had grown into the role of the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog. He had the time, the inclination, and, more importantly, the perfect vantage point, his corner house with its wide, unobstructed view of the street. But this morning, his attention was fixated on the house next door. The Tudor-style home had always been unremarkable until a few weeks ago, when it was sold to an anonymous buyer. Since then, its once empty driveway had become a hub of activity, with Ubers pulling in and out at all hours of the day and night. The visitors, mostly young black men and women, lingered outside, chatting or laughing as they waited for their rides. The faint, unmistakable aroma of marijuana sometimes drifted across Richard's immaculate garden, carried by the gentle breeze. Richard squinted, watching as another Uber pulled up. A tall young man wearing a hoodie stepped out, clutching a laptop and a backpack. He exchanged a friendly nod with another visitor leaning against the porch railing, holding what looked like a rolled joint. Richard felt a familiar knot of unease in his stomach. "This can't be good," he muttered to himself. He grabbed his notebook from the kitchen counter and jotted down the time and details of the latest visitor. The growing list of entries painted a picture he found troubling: late-night gatherings, the smell of weed, and bursts of loud music that reverberated faintly through his walls. The final straw came that evening. Richard had stepped outside to water his flower beds when he heard a snippet of a conversation from the porch next door. "You think this track's ready for Cole to hear?" one voice said. "Man, he's gonna love it. This beat is fire." The words struck Richard like a bolt. Cole? Was that code? A dealer's alias? It had to be, he reasoned. Who else would warrant such reverence? His heart raced as he imagined the house next door becoming a hub for illegal activity, tarnishing the reputation of his beloved neighborhood. That night, after another round of booming bass lines and muffled chatter, Richard made his decision. He picked up his phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. "I'd like to report suspicious activity at 324 Oak Ridge Drive," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "I think there might be drug dealing going on there. Lots of visitors, strange hours. You should check it out." After hanging up, he felt a twinge of guilt, but quickly brushed it aside. He wasn't being malicious. He was protecting his community. The tranquility of Oak Ridge Heights was shattered 2 days later. At dawn, the street was swarming with flashing blue and red lights. Richard awoke to the sound of helicopter blades slicing through the air. He rushed to his window, heart pounding, and was greeted by the sight of heavily armed SWAT officers filing out of black armored vehicles. The target was clear: the house next door. "Good," Richard murmured to himself, a grim satisfaction settling in his chest. "They're finally handling it." Neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, some stepping onto their porches in robes and slippers. Whispers rippled through the street as everyone speculated about what was happening. Meanwhile, the SWAT team moved with precision, shouting commands and battering down the front door with a deafening crash. Inside, chaos erupted. The young visitors, startled from their sleep, raised their hands in confusion and fear as officers stormed in with guns drawn. Rooms were ransacked, surveillance cameras ripped from their mounts. Expensive recording equipment was overturned, wires tangled like discarded spaghetti. An officer kicked over a sleek black speaker, sending it tumbling across the room. "Clear," one officer shouted as they moved through the house, searching for evidence of drugs or illegal paraphernalia. But there was none to be found. Instead, they discovered a state-of-the-art recording studio, complete with soundproof walls, keyboards, mixers, and microphones. The walls were adorned with posters of hip-hop legends and shelves stocked with vinyl records. The scene was a stark contradiction to the assumption of a drug den. The officers stood awkwardly among the chaos they had created, their presence an unspoken acknowledgement of their error. Outside, a crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Richard stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching as young men and women were led out of the house for questioning. They looked more bewildered than guilty. Then, he spotted a familiar face emerging from a sleek black SUV that had just pulled up: J. Cole. Richard blinked in disbelief as the Grammy-winning rapper and producer stepped out, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, his expression a mix of frustration and calm. Cameras flashed as reporters swarmed the scene, microphones thrust forward to capture his response. "This house," Cole began, addressing the gathering crowd, "is not a drug den. It's a creative space, a place where young artists can express themselves, learn, and grow. It's about building something positive for the community, not tearing it down." Richard's jaw dropped as the realization hit him like a freight train. The man he had reported, the supposed criminal mastermind, was one of the most respected figures in the music industry. His stomach churned with a sickening mix of embarrassment and guilt. The media frenzy intensified as Cole continued to speak, his words measured and powerful. "This raid is a symptom of a bigger problem," he said. "Assumptions were made. Assumptions that could have cost lives. We need to do better." As Cole's words reverberated through the crowd, Richard retreated into his house, his ears burning with shame. But even as he closed the door, the muffled sounds of applause outside couldn't drown out the truth. He had been wrong, and there was no undoing what had just unfolded. The morning sun streamed through the broken windows of the house next door, illuminating the wreckage left behind by the SWAT raid. J. Cole stood in the doorway, surveying the damage. The front door hung on its hinges, splintered from the battering ram. Inside, overturned furniture, shattered equipment, and scattered papers painted a grim picture of the chaos that had unfolded. The faint smell of marijuana was now overshadowed by the acrid scent of destruction. Cole inhaled deeply, steadying himself. He wasn't one to lash out publicly. His music always spoke louder than anger ever could. "We'll rebuild," he said quietly to one of the young producers who had gathered in the yard, their faces still clouded with disbelief. "This isn't the end." Over the next few days, the damage became a spectacle for the neighborhood. Contractors came and went, replacing windows, repairing the door, and hauling away broken furniture. Richard watched from his window, guilt gnawing at his insides like a relentless tide. His actions had brought this upon them, yet he couldn't bring himself to cross the lawn and apologize. He justified his silence with excuses. "I was protecting the neighborhood. How could I have known?" That evening, Richard's son, Ethan, appeared in the kitchen, fidgeting with his phone. At 16, Ethan was the epitome of suburban adolescence. Shaggy blonde hair, perpetually glued to his earbuds, and a knack for avoiding eye contact during serious conversations. But tonight, his face held an unusual tension. "Dad," Ethan began hesitantly, "can I talk to you for a second?" Richard, seated at the dining table with a newspaper in hand, folded it neatly and set it aside. "What's on your mind?" Ethan glanced at the window, where the house next door loomed like a silent accusation. "You know that house? The one you called the cops on?" Richard stiffened, his face hardening. "Yes. What about it?" "Well, I've been going there." Ethan's words came out in a rush, as though saying them quickly would lessen their weight. "I was sneaking in to record music with some of the guys there. They have this insane studio setup. It's like professional level." Richard's mouth opened, then closed again. Words failed him as he stared at his son, disbelief warring with anger and confusion. "You've been sneaking in there, behind my back?" Ethan nodded, his cheeks flushing. "Yeah. I mean, I didn't think it was a big deal. They're super chill, and they've been helping me work on my music. One of the producers even said I have potential." Richard rose from his chair, his voice rising. "You've been associating with those people? Do you have any idea what kind of trouble you could have gotten into?" Ethan's eyes flashed with defiance. "Those people? Dad, they're not criminals. They're artists, and they've done more for me in a few weeks than anyone else ever has. They actually listened to me." Richard's anger faltered, replaced by a deep, unsettling shame. Ethan pulled out his phone and pressed play on a recording. A smooth, melodic beat filled the room, accompanied by a voice that was unmistakably his son's. The lyrics spoke of dreams, struggles, and finding one's place in the world. "I made this with them," Ethan said softly. "They believed in me when no one else did." Richard sank back into his chair, the weight of his assumptions crashing down on him. For the first time, he saw the situation through a different lens, not as a protector of the neighborhood, but as a man whose prejudices had blinded him to the truth. In the weeks following the raid, J. Cole channeled his frustration into his music. Late nights in the studio gave birth to a song that captured the essence of the incident. Titled Neighbors, the track was a raw, unapologetic reflection on prejudice, systemic racism, and the stereotypes that led to the raid. The song opened with hauntingly simple lyrics. "My neighbors think I'm selling dope." It was a powerful anthem that resonated deeply with listeners, sparking conversations across the country about the realities of racial profiling and the assumptions that often go unquestioned. The song became the centerpiece of Cole's next album, which shot to the top of the charts within days of its release. Critics hailed it as a cultural wake-up call, and the song became a rallying cry for those who had faced similar injustices. Meanwhile, Ethan played the song on repeat. Its message hit close to home, a poignant reminder of the role his family had played in the incident. One evening, as the track filled the living room, Ethan turned to his father. "Do you hear it, Dad?" Ethan asked. "Like, really hear it?" Richard, seated stiffly on the couch, nodded slowly. The lyrics were like daggers, cutting through the wall of excuses he had built around himself. "I hear it," he murmured. Ethan leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. "It's about us, about what happened right here. You can't just ignore it." Richard's chest tightened. He had spent weeks wrestling with his guilt, avoiding eye contact with the neighbors and burying himself in yard work. But Ethan's words forced him to confront the uncomfortable truth. He had been wrong. Deeply, undeniably wrong. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mailbox. It was an invitation from J. Cole himself, inviting the neighborhood to an open house at the rebuilt studio. The event was billed as a celebration of creativity and community, a chance for locals to meet the artists and see the positive impact the space was making. Richard hesitated, the invitation resting on the kitchen counter like a challenge. It was Ethan who finally persuaded him to go. "Come on, Dad," Ethan said. "You need to see this for yourself." When they arrived, the house was buzzing with activity. Young artists filled the rooms, working on beats, sketching designs, and sharing ideas. The air was alive with creativity, a stark contrast to the chaos of the raid. J. Cole moved through the crowd, stopping to chat with guests and offer encouragement to the artists. Richard stood awkwardly near the entrance, his hands shoved into his pockets. He felt out of place, an outsider in a world he had misunderstood. Then J. Cole approached, extending a hand. "Glad you could make it," Cole said, his tone warm but knowing. Richard hesitated before shaking his hand. I owe you an apology," he began, his voice faltering. "I made assumptions that I shouldn't have." Cole nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's not about the apology. It's about what you do next." As the evening went on, Richard watched in awe as the young artists shared their work. Ethan, encouraged by Cole's team, performed his song for the crowd. The pride in his son's eyes was unmistakable, and for the first time, Richard felt a glimmer of hope that he could learn and grow from his mistakes. When the event ended, Richard stood on his porch, watching as the house next door came alive with music and laughter. He still couldn't bring himself to say the words, "I'm sorry," directly, but he knew that actions would speak louder than words. For now, he resolved to listen, to learn, and to support the community he had once feared. And as the melody of Neighbors echoed in his mind, he realized that change was possible if he had the courage to embrace it. Thank you for joining us on this thought-provoking journey about assumptions, redemption, and the courage to embrace change. Richard's story reminds us that the truth often lies beneath the surface, and challenging our own biases can lead to personal and collective growth. If this story has resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know where you're listening from. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another powerful tale from Hopeful Horizon. We'll be back soon with more stories that challenge, inspire, and stay with you long after they're told. Until next time, stay open, stay kind, and always seek the truth.